Hello, everyone. This is Phil Johnson, and with me today is Sherry Welsh of sherrywelsh.com. Sherry's a leadership coach, and she works with professionals, both individuals privately and with groups within companies. And she's also an author. You can get her book, which is titled Slowing Down: Unexpected Ways to Thrive as a Female Leader, from all the major book retailers, Amazon and others. And you can now also subscribe to this podcast, the Sherry Welsh Coaching Podcast, on iTunes and a number of other podcast directories. Sherry, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Now, Sherry, we were talking a bit about the subject of trust, which you said has been coming up in a lot of your sessions lately, both your individual coaching sessions and in group sessions, workshops and seminars. And you have a helpful diagram that you call your trust model that's available as a download on your website. If you'd like to get that PDF download, you can go to sherrywelsh.com/downloads. But we'd like to kind of take that diagram that you've got and develop it into a 3-part podcast series, because it's a triangular model that shows trust built on 3 things: integrity, transparency, and communication. And we want to kind of introduce these 3 things overall and then get into each one individually a little bit deeper. So in today's podcast, we'll give a bit of an introduction and then we'll delve into the matter of integrity. So maybe you can go ahead and get us started and introduce what this trust model is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Phil. So what I'm discovering over the last few years that I've been working with clients, and especially in different companies with leadership teams, the topic of trust comes up quite a bit. So I developed this model that I feel is making it very simple and making it very clear of what components can be addressed and taken time to develop, and not make it hard, but really keep it simple in developing these 3 aspects of what builds trust. And that means building trust in others that you work with, or others in your personal life that you're involved with. And it also means building your own credibility and having others trust you more and more. And that results then in more responsibility, more promotions, broader, depth of career aspect, maybe a broader relationship at home with different friends, with your kids, that you develop a trust with them that continues to grow. And each of these components, these elements of this model, I found to be the common factors over and over in our conversations. So I'm excited to talk through the different scenarios where I've seen this and what these 3 elements can do to increase and foster healthy, trusting relationships, both personally and professionally.
Yeah. Now, we're going to talk about these 3 things: integrity, communication, and transparency, one at a time. But you mentioned to me that in your experience, they're not sequential and they're kind of intertwined. I wonder if you could explain that a little bit more for us, just as a way of introduction.
Sure. So as you said, they're totally intertwined. One doesn't exist without the other when it comes to building and fostering trust. And so what I have found is, as I define integrity, I consider it actions matching your words. So you say, or you do what you say you're going to do, is what integrity means to me.
Yeah.
So you're honoring your word. Transparency to me is getting everything on the table so you know what you're working with, and not holding back, not keeping secrets, not withholding information from a group, from an individual that you're working with. So transparency is really getting everything on the table so that the best ideas can get generated and the most open relationship can be developed. And then when communication is intertwined with all of this as well, because everything comes down to how we communicate. How do we listen? How do we talk to each other? How do we write, in the written word that we use? Because email is such a method of communication that we have in our society today. So how well we communicate, what kind of questions we ask to clarify to make sure we're understanding the task at hand or the situation or the relationship. Mm-hmm. So all three are a little bit interdependent and work in harmony with each other. And so they're not mutually exclusive and they're not sequential, as you mentioned. So it's really exciting to just kind of help get out there a conversation about this and share what I've come to see as something that is showing up constantly in organizations as they go through major changes, as they go through budget reductions, headcount freezes, anything going on that creates any kind of angst in an organization or in a family dynamic or with friends.
Sure.
The first area that's going to be hit is one of these three in some way, and then trust will erode.
Right. So, as the title of this podcast indicates, trust can be going one of those two directions. We can either be building it or it can be eroding. Probably, if we're not paying attention to these three things, it's going to be eroding.
Yeah.
But let's get into the matter of integrity a little bit. I like your definition. You mentioned just very simply that integrity in our personal relationships, in our professional relationships, I guess to bring it out of the realm of morals and ethics, it's to do what you say you're going to do. And it seems to me that if I'm acting with integrity and you're acting with integrity, we're both doing what we say we're going to be doing, then trust should be growing, trust should be developing. But I think there's more to this, right? As we'll see when we get into it a little bit more, but maybe you can start there.
Sure, yeah. When we have people, individuals saying they're going to do something and then they don't, according to, the agreed upon timing or assignment or commitment they made, then what happens underneath the next time you ask that person to do something, you're gonna have a memory of that previous time where you asked them and then they didn't deliver. And so you start to hesitate on how often you ask them. And then you don't give them a chance to rebuild the trust that may have been eroding by giving them something to act on and honor their word as you co-create strong agreements with them. So with that can be on the personal side. If you have someone that's consistently late to showing up for dinner or showing up at meetings that you're going to have socially, you start to not rely on them. So if there's a social gathering, you may not ask them to do something because you're not sure whether they're going to show up on time.
You don't ask them to bring the appetizer, you ask them to bring dessert.
The dessert. Exactly. Yeah. So they start to gently be excluded and not intentionally. It's not that you have this, mission to exclude them because they're not trustworthy. It happens over time. Mm-hmm. So the integrity aspect is so critical because in the workplace, especially in the leadership teams that I work with, trusting your colleagues and trusting your boss and trusting each other to move in the direction you say you're going to move in as far as a leadership team goes or a company goes. That inherent trust is really critical in the organization's success and as role models for the rest of the organization. So if others in the organization believe that the leadership team doesn't trust each other, that really destroys the culture of the company. Mm-hmm. And it's very pervasive. It permeates at all levels. So the integrity aspect is really a day-by-day activity. It's a day-by-day practice to recognize, okay, what did I commit to? Who did I say I was going to get this done by today and in what format? And is that still possible, given the 15 other things that just came up as more urgent? So people act out of integrity, not always because they want to, because they're thinking about it. It happens because of the kind of pace we live in our society and around the world. And this is the treadmill living versus the slowed down life.
Yeah.
So integrity can be at risk when we are not slowed down, when we are saying yes to too many things, when we are in a rush going from meeting to meeting to meeting. Mm-hmm. And what happens is we innocently don't honor our word. Well, it's for all of us, and me included. I practice this on an ongoing basis with my clients and with my son and with my family members. It's honoring my word and doing what I say I'm going to do. And when I'm not able to, I let them know ahead of time. I had a situation that I had committed to another coach. She was running a large event, and I was going to be one of the many coaches there to support that event and participate as a coach to the participants. And I had committed a year in advance that I would be there. Well, then life started to get in the way, and I made some decisions to move, and I had my client base was building, and so I started to feel a bit pressured that I really wasn't able to make the flight and the trip to get out there and participate in this event. It just wasn't as high a priority as some of these other things that had come up since then.
Sure.
So what I did was call her, let her know. I sent her a note, and I said, hey, I realize I committed to participate in this. It's a couple months away. I want to let you know now that I'm no longer able to. And I apologize that I overcommitted myself, because it's not her fault. It's my ownership that I overcommitted myself.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do what I can to find a replacement so that you have someone even better at that event than what I'm able to give at this point. So, and she was really appreciative. She immediately found someone else that was even better than I would have been. And it worked out really well. She wished me well, and I could move on and take care of the other things that had come up. So it's never too late to get back in integrity with your word. Doesn't mean that you're still going to deliver on what you said you were going to do. It could be that something came up and you're not able to hold your part of the agreement. And then we'll talk about the communication of that in the next round.
Sure. But if we can stay here on this illustration a little bit, just to highlight maybe the obvious, but you maintained integrity with communication. And then you mentioned it was a couple of months in advance, which gave her time to respond appropriately. You didn't put her event in jeopardy.
Exactly.
Where if you held that information back to a week before, maybe it would have affected her event negatively. There's that aspect of concern about how the other person will respond that sometimes I think affects our communication in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what was going through my head, Phil, was she's not going to like me anymore. She's going to think I'm not reliable. Mm-hmm. She's never going to ask me to do anything again. All those thoughts came in.
Yeah.
And you touched on the communication for sure was one aspect. The other was transparency. That what I was able to do was put it on the table ahead of time, put it all out there and say, look, this is what's going on for me.
Yeah.
And I take responsibility for saying yes to these other things. And what I'm now feeling is a bit level one victim, mm-hmm. that I have, I'm overwhelmed.
Right.
And so what that was doing for me was having me be unproductive in my day-to-day work. It was a lingering thought because it was hanging out there. So the longer I don't address it, the more distracting it is for me. So that's what happens with integrity, is that many times the person is exactly as you said. They're afraid of saying something because they don't want the person to not like them or respect them or think that they're not trustworthy, right? And then it actually backfires because you don't say anything until it's too late. And then you've done some damage. Now you've really eroded the trust. Even though they may give you another chance, it's going to be hesitating in the future. And they may not give you another chance. It depends what's going on for them.
Right. And I think if you approached that conversation in a level 5 kind of partnering sort of way, and if both of you did, then there could have been other like mutually agreeable sort of outcomes to that. Maybe she would say, well, I'd really like you to join in some way. And, she patches you in with an internet video connection or something. Or she might present something in a way where that event became higher priority to you. There are a lot of ways I could see that playing out when you approach it in that higher partnering kind of energy level.
Right. And, you don't have to go into all sorts of details to explain yourself. That's another thing I've learned, is if you're not able to honor your word, you're not able to honor your word. And you don't have to go and explain what got in the way and why it's not possible and this wasn't as important, because that can add more problems to the situation or more frustration from both sides. So you just be clear about it. You be simple about it. You own it. So in my case, I owned it. And I said, I overcommitted myself.
Right. I think that's a good illustration. There's another kind of scenario that I'd like to explore related to integrity. And that is, I guess, on my part, it seems relatively simple to control whether I act with integrity or not. If I just do what I say I'm going to do, or I communicate clearly when it's not possible for me to do what I said I was going to do. That seems relatively simple to control. But how do we handle when it seems there was a clear agreement? At least to my reckoning, it was spelled out what my colleague was going to do and when it was going to happen and the form it was going to be delivered in, and then it doesn't happen. So there's kind of a breakdown of integrity on their part. What do I do in that case? I think my initial reaction probably would be to say, well, that's not a trustworthy person. But I have a feeling you're going to say there are more options than that.
Yeah, definitely. There's always more options, right, in any scenario. So in that case, I get what you're saying, and I would sometimes catch myself to have the same reaction. Is that, well, I just can't trust them to do anything. They didn't keep their word. It was very clear. They said they were going to do it. I don't understand. How could they do this to me? So those kind of thoughts now are coming in that they did something to me. So there I would shift that to take ownership of getting clarity on what happened. Let's talk about this. Let's see what took place here so that we can together work to not let it happen again. So that we can now rebuild that trust together. Mm-hmm. Because if I don't address it, okay, they didn't honor their word, and I can still take the leadership on that. I can still take the lead to say, well, wait a minute, I want to address this. I don't want to let this go by and now build some resentment, which takes me to my level 2, fighter mode, to be resentful. Instead, I'm going to come from a level 5 perspective, a true partner perspective, and say, okay, how can I help us do this more successfully next time together? So the way to do that then is to ask, hey, my understanding was we had an agreement, and my belief was it was clear. It seems something got in the way of you honoring your part of the agreement. Mm-hmm. So not you honoring the agreement, honoring your part of the agreement, because the agreement now is co-created, right? There's 2 of us involved. And just very kindly ask, hey, help me understand what happened. So it's not an attack. It's not putting them down for being irresponsible, for not doing what they said they were going to do. It's really a gentle, kind way to discover what happened. And maybe we can plan for that next time so we don't allow it to get in the way of us, working together and meeting our commitments. So even though it feels like it's out of our control, it's someone else's integrity that quote unquote failed, you can still take leadership in that. You can still take ownership to say, all right, there's got to be something that just wasn't clear enough from my side. Or this just didn't mean as much to them as it means to me.
Right.
So I want to make sure I communicate that more effectively next time and see what I can do to minimize the possibility that this would happen again.
Yeah. I guess it's easy to jump to the conclusion that person's a flake, but if we think about it in terms of our own self, we don't want to be perceived as a flake. It doesn't feel good to say you're going to do something and then fail to deliver. So, yeah, I like where you're going with that. There's probably something going on the other side. Maybe there was a lack of communication in co-creating the agreement. Maybe they weren't transparent about something. But I can't necessarily assume that because they didn't deliver, this is a person devoid of integrity and I can never trust them again.
Exactly.
They may be down in level 1 or level 2, feeling like I've overcommitted and there's nothing I can do. But I like that approach that you're presenting, how you can sort of bring them up out of that, the lower energy levels by approaching them with partner energy. It might open their eyes to see, oh, there's another way we can do this.
Yeah, and it also is level 4 compassion too. That something got in the way, something went off, because most people from that I know in my experience really do want to honor their word if they were a part of creating it, the agreement. So it's then noticing that maybe it wasn't co-created as much as I thought it was.
Yeah.
Maybe it was more my idea and they just agreed. They just said, yes, I agree, which isn't as strong of a co-created agreement. So really then I have some compassion, like, okay, how can I help them so that, and then level 5, together we can ensure that both of us come out of this feeling good, making progress, moving forward, meeting the goal or objective or whatever it is that we were working on together.
Great. This has been a really good introduction to this trust model that you've developed, and we've gotten a good overview of the integrity part of it, and I'm looking forward to our next couple of podcasts where we'll get into the matter of communication and transparency. So thanks so much for joining us today, Sherry.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I enjoyed it.
And I hope you all will continue to listen to the next 2 parts of this series. I think you're going to find it really helpful. For Sherry Welsh today, this is Phil Johnson. Thanks.